For the rational man to hold steadfastly to his self-image ensures his abysmal ignorance. He ignores the fact that shamanism is not incantations and hocus pocus, but the freedom to perceive not only the world taken for granted, but everything else that is humanly possible to accomplish. He trembles at the possibility of freedom, and freedom is at his fingertips.
There are many different books and movies that influenced George Lucas to make Star Wars the way that it is. For example, Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces is always credited as one of the biggest source of influence, alongside with Akira Kurosawa's movies. However, in my search to find explanations about the Force, cosmic force, and the living force, I found Carlos Castaneda's books to be the most useful and informative in that regard. At first I didn't find much, but as I kept reading, I was pleasantly surprised. After finishing all 12 books that Castaneda has written, I found many spiritual teachings that definitely influenced George Lucas. Looking at it now, it's baffling to me why Castaneda rarely gets credited as a source of influence. Here are just a few mentions that I could find. There's one in Gary Jenkins' Empire Building, where it states that Lucas also read works of modern mythologists like Carlos Castaneda and Joseph Campbell. And another mentioned that Lucas had found the inspiration for the idea in a story in Carlos Castaneda's Tales of Power. Also, on Castaneda's official Wikipedia page, it is noted that George Lucas has stated that Yoda and Luke Skywalker were inspired in part by Don Juan and Castaneda. In truth though, there is more to it than just a few inspirations. I will share all of them as we move along. The goal of this video is to explain the cosmic force, living force, and force in general, alongside many other spiritual elements that Star Wars covers. This can be done by examining various sources that inspired Lucas to create the Force as it is in the movies. If we dive deep into those sources, they'll help us understand better how the Force works in Star Wars. This video will be me sharing, examining, and analyzing all that I have found in my research, mostly discussing Castaneda, which I have found to be the key to understanding the Force, then gradually transitioning into other spiritual, mythological, and religious sources. It has been debated to this day whether Castaneda's books tell authentic, true stories that really happened to him, or whether it was all made up. This video is not meant to convince anyone that whatever is written in Castaneda's books are true or false. I'm simply outlining the similarities between books and the movies, possible influences and inspirations. This passion project of mine has been in development for more than a year. The amount of source material that I've examined and worked with is quite large. So what you see is my humble attempt to explain a very delicate and complex set of teachings. For my analysis, I will be strictly using only the first 6 movies in the Clone Wars animation series through season 6. This is all about George and his beautiful work, and not the expanded universe or the Disney products. I hope you will find this video useful and enjoy the ride. And with that, let us begin. Carlos Castaneda was an American writer. Starting in 1968 to the late 90s, Castaneda wrote a series of books that described training in shamanism that he received under the tutelage of a Yaqui Indian named Juan Matus. As the story goes, the old shaman sorcerer took him as an apprentice, and throughout the years taught him all the marvels of sorcery. Those events, teachings, and practices are described in all of his books. 2 sorcery terms need to be explained before we proceed, since they are often used and may confuse the viewer. First and most important term you will hear is seeing, or someone who is called a seer, which in sorcery terms means a person who can see energy directly. In other, more widely known terms, this is called opening your third eye, when the ability to see energy directly becomes possible. So a seer is someone who can see energy. To help you visualize, to at least grasp the concept of seeing, it is somewhat similar to what Neo sees when he looks at Seraph's body in the Matrix. This is how Castaneda's mentor, Don Juan Matus, describes human beings while seeing, as he himself was a seer.
Human beings are not objects. They have no solidity. They are round, luminous beings. They are boundless.
Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter.
The first truth about awareness, as I have already told you, is that the world out there is not really as we think it is. We think it is a world of objects, and it's not. Everything is energy. The whole universe is energy. The social base of our perception should be the physical certainty that energy is all there is. These sorcerers called this ability to perceive energy as it flowed in the universe seeing. They described seeing as a state of heightened awareness in which the human body is capable of perceiving energy as a flow, a current, a wind-like vibration.
This concept of seeing energy directly actually existed in the early scripts of A New Hope. In one of the latest drafts, there's a dialogue between Ben Kenobi and Luke, which indicates Jedi such as Kenobi were able to see. Also, the term aura is used in even earlier drafts, back when it was still called Adventures of Starkiller. An aura can only be seen through seeing, though ability to see was cut from the final versions of the script for reasons unknown. Another term we often will hear is a warrior, which describes someone who's training and is on the path of shamanism sorcery. In this case, the term warrior doesn't imply to literally be a warrior, to fight battles, but rather, the warrior stands for a sorcerer who fights his inner self, his arrogance, self-importance, his stupidity, his own ego. And since this battle is always ongoing, the warrior is always at war.
I pointed out to him that he had once told me that war was the natural state for a warrior, that peace was an anomaly. That's right, he admitted. But war for a warrior doesn't mean acts of individual or collective stupidity or wanton violence. War for a warrior is the total struggle against that individual self that has deprived man of his power.
Help you I can. Yes.
I don't think so. I'm looking for a great warrior.
Oh! Great warrior. Oh! Wars not make one great.
To be a sorcerer doesn't mean to practice witchcraft, or to work to affect people, or to be possessed by demons. To be a sorcerer means to reach a level of awareness that makes inconceivable things available.
To put everything into a clear perspective, I'm going to start from ancient times, how seers came to be in the first place. At first, it might not make much sense why I'm explaining these, but it will all make sense later. The world of sorcerers is complex, and to get a hold of an idea, the Force, which is in their terminology called the Spirit, We need to begin from the very beginning.
Ages before the Spaniards came to Mexico, there were extraordinary Toltec seers, men capable of inconceivable deeds. They were the last link in a chain of knowledge that extended over thousands of years. The way the Toltecs first started on the path of knowledge was by eating power plants. Whether prompted by curiosity or hunger or error, they ate them. Don Juan said that after some of these men had finally learned to see, after centuries of dealing with power plants, the most enterprising of them then began to teach other men of knowledge how to see. Very young children were given to the old seers as apprentices, so that they wouldn't know any other way of life. Those children, in turn, when they came of age, took other children as apprentices.
To summarize what happened afterwards, seers grew in numbers. Different seers had different teachings, practices, and methods they would bestow on their apprentices. However, there were practices that were common among many of them, such as the one, for example, they called dreaming, which is a set of different practices and techniques made to learn how to consciously leave one's physical body and travel with the energy body. Today, this is commonly known as astral projection, or OBE, short for out-of-body experience. In their dreaming adventures, ancient seers encountered unimaginable beings, traveled in mesmerizing worlds, and gained knowledge which they brought back with them to the world where we live. As time went on, seers grew in power with the knowledge they have accumulated. Some used that power to help others, and some did the exact opposite. There were often wars between neighboring tribes, and many sorcerers found themselves involved in them whether they wanted it or not. Many tried to avoid dying, not only in battles, but dying in general. This forever has been and still is the most important goal for the sorcerers, to achieve total freedom, freedom from death itself. I will gradually unfold how Seers managed it, and how this exact phenomena of maintaining awareness after death is so similar to what we see in Star Wars. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Ancient Seers did not know how to maintain awareness after death. They have found some shady ways to prolong their lives, or to make deals with beings they met while dreaming. Beings that offered a safe world where Seers would live there for almost an eternity, but in exchange they could never leave the world willingly. And a vast amount of ancient sorcerers fell for such traps. Those who were greedy and power-hungry were hated by many, so they were hunted down and killed in terrible ways. Those who were powerful, yet kind and generous, found ways to take populations of entire cities with them and escape into other worlds through dreaming. Eventually, for the reasons I just mentioned, the number of Seers started to drop. After carefully examining everything that was causing their kind to slowly fade away, Seers came to the conclusion that the biggest threat out there was not the neighboring enemy tribes, or beings they met while dreaming, or anything else, but rather the core of all troubles were themselves. Their self-importance, their greed, their arrogance, their ego was their greatest enemy. The problem wasn't outside, it was inside. Gaining extraordinary abilities with no discipline of the self resulted in catastrophic results. Power corrupted, blinded, and imprisoned many of them. The thing that should have led them to their freedom did the exact opposite. This had to be stopped. They've realized that all of this can be avoided if they just discipline their behavior. So, some Seers figured out and established a new practice, which they called stalking. And those few who would practice it are called stalkers. First of all, stalking is practiced to control one's behavior. Stalker stalks himself of all the stupidity and all the flaws that he has, becomes aware of them, and proceeds to eradicate them. Hence why it's called stalking, because Stalker stalks himself, like a hunter stalking and hunting its prey. He finds his enemies and destroys them. True enemy, which is not outside, but rather inside. The many flaws we all have.
Self-importance is our greatest enemy. What weakens us is feeling offended by the deeds and misdeeds of our fellow men. Our self-importance requires that we spend most of our lives offended by someone. The new Seers recommended that every effort should be made to eradicate self-importance from the lives of warriors. Without self-importance, we are invulnerable. To get rid of the self-importance that is rotten requires a masterpiece of strategy. Seers, through the ages, have given the highest praise to those who have accomplished it. The thrust of the warrior's way is to dethrone self-importance, and everything sorcerers do is toward accomplishing this goal. Self-pity is the real enemy and the source of man's misery. Without a degree of pity for himself, man could not afford to be as self-important as he is. Egomania is a real tyrant. We must work ceaselessly to dethrone it.
Additionally, some stalkers have realized that the best way to survive is to become invisible to the public eye, to become masters of the skies, sometimes removing themselves from the cities to live somewhere on the outskirts, or staying in the cities while pretending to be someone they're not. No more living in giant temples and being all-known powerful sorcerer that everyone knows where and how to find. This became a subcategory in stalking, the technique of being in disguise, to make sure no one ever knows who you truly are, what your real name is, where you come from, and so on. Seers called it controlled folly, and this is the inspiration for Yoda when we first meet him on Dagobah. Master of controlled folly.
Mine!
R2! Now you move along, little fella. We got a lot of work to do.
No! Stay and help you, I will. Find your friend. Yes, but now we must eat. Come. Good food.
The first is that stalkers learn never to take themselves seriously. They learn to laugh at themselves. If they're not afraid of being a fool, they can fool anyone.
Yoda acts all silly while in reality having unimaginable force powers. This is how Carlos Castaneda's mentor, Don Juan Matus, would act. Absolutely childlike one day, and other times dead serious. Or just being super weird, wearing weathered clothing one day and an expensive clean suit the other. Having different names and different identities.
Within the art of stalking, there is a technique which sorcerers use a great deal: controlled folly. Sorcerers claim that controlled folly is the only way they have of dealing with themselves in their state of expanded awareness and perception, and with everybody and everything in the world of daily affairs. Don Juan had explained controlled folly as the art of controlled deception, or the art of pretending to be thoroughly immersed in the action at hand, pretending so well no one could tell it from the real thing. Controlled folly is not an outright deception, he had told me, but a sophisticated, artistic way of being separated from everything while remaining an integral part of everything.
The first 4 to 6 books influenced the original trilogy the most, since they were released before and during that time frame when the original trilogy was coming out. The idea of using another person, perhaps an alien, for Luke to play off came up during story meetings. George Lucas and Leigh Brackett thought that the alien could be an Indian desert type, very childlike even though he's an old man. Whether George had a complete understanding of controlled folly or simply was inspired by Don Juan, who was sometimes acting like a silly old Indian living in the desert of Arizona, makes a little difference. The inspiration was from Castaneda's books. Especially the dynamic between Yoda and Luke is very much like the dynamic between Castaneda and Don Juan.
Is it possible that warriors are only preparing themselves for death? No way, he said. Warriors prepare themselves to be aware. And full awareness comes to them only when there is no more self-importance left in them. Only when they are nothing do they become everything.
The term New Seers is used to describe seers of the past millennia or so, but more often specifically those who have survived the Spaniards. Seers such as Don Juan and his lineage of sorcerers who lasted for the last hundreds of years.
The Spanish conquerors swept the land. Fortunately, by that time the new seers were thoroughly prepared to face that danger. They were already consummate practitioners of the art of stalking.
Because of the stalking, and specifically the practice of a controlled folly, some seers hid efficiently, and through that, managed to survive the Spaniards. Those seers who were not stalkers and followed the old ways were hunted down and killed. Very few stalkers who did survive scattered all around the continent. Each sorcerer passed down their teachings to their apprentices. And those ancient sorcery teachings have made their way into our time, finally culminating with Carlos Castaneda meeting Don Juan Matus.
I am a sorcerer. I belong to a lineage of sorcerers that has lasted for 27 generations. I am the Nagual of my generation. He explained to me that the leader of a party of sorcerers like himself was called the Nagual, and that this was a generic term applied to a sorcerer in each generation who had some specific energetic configuration that set him apart from the others.
The new seers were not interested in cheating death to prolong their lives or making deals with beings from other dimensions to be trapped somewhere for almost an eternity. They've had enough of ancient seers and their arrogant, self-indulging, greedy, power-hungry ways. Their time has ended. The new seers focused on one thing and one thing only: to maintain their awareness after death, complete and total freedom, whatever it takes.
Freedom is like a contagious disease. It is transmitted. Its carrier is an impeccable Nagual. People might not appreciate that, and that's because they don't want to be free. Freedom is frightening, remember that. But not for us. I've groomed myself nearly all my life for this moment, and so will you.
But maintaining awareness after death is easier said than done. It was known through seeing that once a human being dies, his awareness feeds into an unimaginable abstract force.
There is a force that attracts our consciousness, much as a magnet attracts iron shavings. At the moment of dying, all of our being disintegrates under the attraction of that immense force. He said that the old seers, risking untold dangers, actually saw the indescribable force which is the source of all sentient beings. They called it the eagle, because in the few glimpses that they could sustain, they saw it as something that resembled a black and white eagle of infinite size. The eagle creates sentient beings so that they will live and enrich the awareness it gives them with life. They also saw that it is the eagle who devours that same enriched awareness after making sentient beings relinquish it at the moment of death.
This is very similar to Qui Gon's explanation of the cosmic force and how all life feeds into it.
Living beings generate the living force, which in turn powers the wellspring that is the cosmic force. All energy from the living force, from all things that have ever lived, feeds into the cosmic force.
Life passes from the living force into the cosmic force and becomes one with it. One powers the other. One is renewed by the other.
They saw that the awareness of sentient beings flies away at the moment of death and floats like a luminous cotton puff right into the eagle's beak to be consumed.
However, new seers have discovered that there is a way to avoid this terrible fate, to sneak by the eagle unnoticed. Among many practices and training one must go through to be a warrior, the important part one has to achieve is to lose the individual's self, become empty, so to speak, free from ego. This is the one of the key ingredients that lets a warrior sneak by the eagle. One's personality that is accumulated throughout life needs to die completely before actually dying physically.
You will stay in that room until you die. His request scared me, but at the same time, it made me laugh. Not that I'm going to do it, Don Juan, I said, but what would be the criteria to know that I'm dead? Unless you want me to actually die physically. No, he said. I don't want your body to die physically. I want your person to die. The two are very different affairs. In essence, your person has very little to do with your body. Your person is your mind, and believe you me, your mind is not yours.
We'll return to this subject later on and examine in detail in Trials of Yoda. Dying does not mean dying physically, but rather dying as a personality, an ego, slowly, bit by bit. Yoda undergoes an extreme change between prequels and the original trilogy. The difference is astounding.
Died, have I?
In a way.
We're warriors, and warriors have only one thing in mind, their freedom. To die and be eaten by the eagle is no challenge. On the other hand, to sneak around the eagle and be free is the ultimate audacity.
The cosmic force described by Qui Gon is very much identical to the eagle that was described by the old Seers. However, the force and the cosmic force are very different things entirely. In Castaneda, there is an abstract force which they call the spirit.
The force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
The force that binds that group of energy fields together was, according to the sorcerers of ancient Mexico, the most mysterious force in the universe. His personal estimation was that it was the pure essence of the entire cosmos, the sum total of everything there is.
The sorcerers of my lineage call it infinity, the spirit, the dark sea of awareness, and say that it is something that exists out there and rules our lives. An impersonal force that has endless things in storage for those who dare to seek them. It is a force in the universe, like light or gravity. I told you there is no way to talk about the spirit, because the spirit can only be experienced. The spirit manifests itself to a sorcerer, especially to a Nagual, at every turn. However, this is not the entire truth. The entire truth is that the spirit reveals itself to everyone with the same intensity and consistency, but only sorcerers, and Naguals in particular, are attuned to such revelations. Sorcerers, and specifically the Naguals, therefore had to be actively and permanently on the lookout for manifestations of the spirit. Such manifestations were called gestures of the spirit, or more simply, indications or omens.
These gestures, omens, and signs became the guidelines for the new Seers. For example, they did not take little children as their apprentices like ancient Seers did. Rather, they allowed the spirit to bring forth the apprentice, whoever it might be, no matter the age, gender, or nationality. They called this the intent of the spirit, or the intent of infinity, which is the same in Star Wars terms as the will of the Force.
Finding him was the will of the Force. I have no doubt of that.
His steps and mine were guided by infinity, and that circumstances that seemed to be ruled by chance were in essence ruled by the active side of infinity. He called it intent. What put you and me together was the intent of infinity. It's impossible to determine what this intent of infinity is, yet it is there, as palpable as you and I are. Sorcerers say that it is a tremor in the air.
So the logical question arises, how does one connect to the spirit, hear and know its intent? The key is completely stopping the thoughts. Sorcerers also call it stopping the world or acquiring inner silence. This is one of the most important goals that warriors need to achieve.
They continually speak to us, telling us the will of the Force. When you learn to quiet your mind, you'll hear them speaking to you.
We are all familiar with meditation and how it is commonly practiced to achieve a state where thoughts quiet down. Seers have come to the same conclusion as other cultures around the world. The mind needs to be quiet, though instead of meditation, they had different techniques to achieve inner silence, which I won't go on explaining in detail what they are, since George uses the meditation technique in Star Wars. Same goal, different technique. Sorcerers say that only after the inner silence is achieved, inconceivable things begin to happen.
Don Juan defined inner silence as a peculiar state of being in which thoughts were cancelled out and one could function from a level other than that of daily awareness. He stressed that inner silence meant the suspension of the internal dialogue, the perennial companion of thoughts, and was therefore a state of profound quietude. The old sorcerers, Don Juan said, called it inner silence because it is a state in which perception doesn't depend on the senses. What is at work during inner silence is another faculty that man has, the faculty that makes him a magical being. What the old sorcerers were after was the final, dramatic end result of reaching that individual threshold of silence. Some very talented practitioners need only a few minutes of silence to reach that coveted goal. Others, less talented, need long periods of silence, perhaps more than 1 hour of complete quietude, before they reach the desired result. The desired result is what the old sorcerers called stopping the world, the moment when everything around us ceases to be what it's always been. This is the moment when sorcerers return to the true nature of man. The old sorcerers also called it total freedom. It is the moment when man, the slave, becomes man, the free being, capable of feats of perception that defy our linear imagination.
When a warrior manages to achieve inner silence, if he wishes to, he can then concentrate on a single thought. By maintaining focus on a singular thought for a long period of time, that thought will have power. It'll manifest itself eventually. The world around the warrior will change. This is not possible with a mind that constantly shifts from one thought to another. When there is chaos in our heads, there is chaos outside as well. When it is peaceful in our minds, it is peaceful outside in the daily world. This is commonly taught spiritual practice across the globe. And this is what Qui Gon's words truly mean when he teaches little Anakin.
Always remember, your focus determines your reality.
In the prequel trilogy, Qui Gon is the perfect embodiment of the warrior and the stalker who has vanquished his ego. He never makes decisions to please his personal interest or anyone else's. Not the Queen's.
The Queen will not approve.
The Queen doesn't need to know.
Not his Padawan.
Do not defy the Council, Master, not again.
I shall do what I must, Obi-Wan.
Not even the Jedi Council.
I take Anakin as my Padawan learner.
Qui-Gon only acts as the conduit to the Force, trusting it and acquiescing to its will, accepting whatever fate it has stored for him and for the people around him without hesitation.
Malicious acts are performed by people for personal gain. The average man acts only if there is the chance for profit. Warriors say they act not for profit, but for the spirit.
Mind you, this was not the way of the ancient Seers, since they were focused on their personal greedy desires. They didn't care much for what was the intent of the spirit. However, the new Seers, with the help of Stalking, no longer cared for personal gains. They have found that merging with the intent of the spirit is the key to everything, including maintaining awareness after death. Just like the new Seers would acquiesce with the intent of the spirit in everyday life, in every situation, and every choice they had to make. This is what Qui Gon does all the time as well, acquiescing with the will of the Force.
Sorcerers, although they seem to make nothing else but decisions, make no decisions at all. I didn't decide to choose you, and I didn't decide that you would be the way you are. Since I couldn't choose to whom I would impart my knowledge, I had to accept whomever the Spirit was offering me, and that person was you.
This way of living, serving the will of the Force, or as sorcerers call it, the intent of infinity, in turn leads a warrior to the best path that is available to him. He no longer battles the forces that surround him. Rather, he merges with the infinity and becomes one with it.
For sorcerers, there's no pondering, wondering, or speculating. They know that all they have is the possibility of merging with the intent of infinity, and they just do it.
One of the most common spiritual teachings across all the globe is the importance of being in the present moment. You will rarely find a single guru who won't tell you about this, if any. Seers are no different.
There is no past or future in the universe. There's only the moment. In the universe, there's only energy, and energy has only a here and now, an endless and ever-present here and now.
See the future. You can.
I exist where there is no future or past.
Is it something I will see in the future? I asked. There's no future, he exclaimed, cuttingly. The future is only a way of talking. For a sorcerer, there is only the here and now.
All his life as he looked away to the future, to the horizon, never his mind on where he was. What he was doing.
Technique of living in the present moment is very similar to the teaching of the living force in Star Wars. We know from Qui-Gon that living beings generate the living force, which in turn feeds into the cosmic force once they die. But the other side of it is often overlooked, what Qui-Gon teaches Obi-Wan in Phantom Menace.
Don't center on your anxieties, Obi-Wan. Keep your concentration here and now where it belongs.
But Master Yoda said I should be mindful of the future.
But not at the expense of the moment. Be mindful of the living force, young Padawan.
Yes, Master.
To be mindful of the living force is the teaching about living in the present moment, to be here and now, to concentrate on the moment. Doing so allows a Jedi to know the will of the Force, which is way easier, almost effortless if a warrior achieves inner silence.
Remember, concentrate on the moment. Feel, don't think. Use your instincts.
I will.
They continually speak to us, telling us the will of the Force. When you learn to quiet your mind, you'll hear them speaking to you.
Qui Gon never worries about the future nor the past. He never plans ahead, because planning ahead means you are worried things may not go your way. First of all, there is no more you, so things cannot go your way. And second, when you trust the Force completely, what is there to worry about? The Force will guide you, no matter how dire the situation is. So the planning isn't needed. He is always calm.
Where is it going?
Don't worry. The Force will guide us. All right, I'm sure another solution will present itself.
Instead of worrying and planning what to do, Qui Gon simply trusts the Force. He is always concentrating on the moment. A warrior acts in the moment, completely trusting the spirit. Whatever happens, happens. He isn't worried of what might be or what might not be. What if this or what if that? One just does, one simply acts. Here and now.
All right, I'll give it a try.
No. Try not. Do. Or do not. There is no try.
Trying is for people who think and plan a lot. Doing is for warriors.
A warrior lives by acting, not by thinking about acting, nor by thinking about what he will think when he has finished acting.
Qui-Gon, time and time again, teaches Obi-Wan to be in the present moment, to be mindful of the living Force.
He is headstrong, and he has much to learn of the living Force, but he is capable. There is little more he can learn from me.
In the first movie, Obi-Wan is divided between two sides: Qui-Gon's teachings of the living Force, and typical Jedi teachings he learned from the masters such as Yoda.
But Master Yoda said I should be mindful of the future.
But not at the expense of the moment. Be mindful of the living Force, young Padawan.
In later movies, Obi-Wan acts way more in the present moment than he does in The Phantom Menace. He trusts the Force more, and this trust brings out fearlessness, and not in the arrogant, nothing gonna happen to me cause I'm so amazing kind of way, but in a more humble, Force will protect me and guide me kind of way.
I sense Count Dooku.
I sense a trap.
Next move?
Spring the trap.
Go and find her. Where are you going, Master?
For a drink.
Ray shields.
Wait a minute. How did this happen? We're smarter than this.
Apparently not. I say patience.
Patience?
Yes. R2 will be along in a few moments, and then he'll release the ray shields.
Hello there.
Obi-Wan found sort of the middle ground between two teachings. He still liked to plan things ahead and strategize once in a while.
I'll keep them distracted until you get there. Just don't take too long.
Obi-Wan becomes a masterful warrior in those 20 years he spends on Tatooine, after receiving more teachings from Qui-Gon.
An old friend has learned the path to immortality. How to commune with him, I will teach you.
His master was an exemplary Jedi. In a way, he served as a director's commentary about how a true Jedi should act and behave in terms of spirituality. This claim can be backed up by a simple fact that through him, our main characters achieve immortality. unlike thousands of other Jedi who had no significant impact throughout the saga. Other Jedi in The Phantom Menace are always portrayed as immovable. They always sit and talk, discuss, and plan ahead. They worry and obey their own made-up rules.
No, he will not be trained.
No.
He is too old.
He is the chosen one. You must see it.
An apprentice you have, Qui Gon. Impossible to take on a second.
The code forbids it.
This is completely opposite of how Qui Gon is portrayed. He is always out there serving the will of the Force. Obi-Wan in The Phantom Menace often argues with Qui Gon, with the generic teachings of the Jedi Order.
The boy will not pass the Council's tests, Master. He's too old.
He also sees a seat on the Council as something important to strive for.
If you would just follow the code, you would be on the Council.
Obi-Wan thinks that when Qui-Gon disobeys Jedi Council, it is because his master wishes so. As if Qui-Gon has some kind of personal agenda or desire or goal of sorts. What Kenobi doesn't realize is that his master is a true warrior and a stalker. He is empty. There is no more Qui-Gon that wants or needs something. He simply does what he must, simply following the will of the Force. No more, no less.
Do not defy the Council, Master, not again.
I shall do what I must, Obi-Wan.
Through Qui-Gon, we can get a hint from Lucas that these rules of age restriction or following the code and the goal to someday be on the Jedi Council are just complete nonsense. It doesn't matter, at least in comparison to the will of the Force, because there is nothing more important than the will of the Force. This is what Kenobi was struggling to learn when he was young.
If you would just follow the code, you would be on the Council. They will not go along with you this time.
You still have much to learn, my young apprentice.
We already briefly touched on the subject of the will of the Force, and how it is called the intent of infinity in Castaneda's books. Now let's dive into how Force, in general, is portrayed in the movies. To do this, I will use another movie which uses a different style of portrayal, so the comparison can be more clear. I will specifically choose a director who is also inspired by Carlos Castaneda's works, and that's Oliver Stone. In his movie Alexander, specifically the Final Cut version, is what I will use for this comparison. This movie has no fantasy elements, except for an eagle that follows Alexander throughout his life. It is used as a filmmaking tool to show that whatever Alexander is doing is approved by the abstract forces that surround him. Call it Greek gods or force or whatever you want. Eagle is a sign, an omen, an indication that Alexander is on the right path, that he is fulfilling his destiny, and when he does so, the eagle is with him. Throughout the movie, we see it following Alexander. Then, as time passes, and Alexander ventures deep into Asia, the eagle is nowhere to be seen.
Where has our eagle gone?
Indicating that Alexander shouldn't be here, that he has deviated from his rightful path, destined to be somewhere else, to do something different. Yet he keeps conquering more and more. Finally, we have a scene where the eagle is bitten by the snake. A beautiful metaphor to his death. There's also a very intriguing imagery of an eagle right before Alexander dies. This is definitely an inspiration from Castaneda. Eagle that devours awareness is taken quite literally from the books.
There is nothing gorgeous or peaceful about death, because the real terror begins upon dying. The eagle will squeeze out of you every flicker of awareness you have ever had.
Excluding this scene, the eagle is an abstract force, a filmmaking tool that outlines for the audience just how significant the current moment is. It also indicates that if an eagle is present, the hero is on the right path.
and when the eagle is absent, it means the opposite. However, in real life, you don't have a flying eagle on top of your head to indicate whether you are doing the right thing or not. It's not outlined for us, not delivered on a silver platter. Force in Star Wars is just like in real life, so to speak. It is not outlined and easily noticed. It is out there, yet you can't see it. One can only feel it. For example, there are no dark clouds gathering around Palpatine, and few crows sitting by his chair to indicate that he's evil. No. Lucas was pretty straightforward in that regard. The meeting between Anakin and Qui Gon is directed in a similar manner. There is no eagle flying over Qui Gon that indicates something to him, or gives him a hint of some sort that the Chosen One is close. But rather, it is something very simple, almost invisible to us. Invisible for average men, like people on Tatooine who dismissed Anakin as a simple slave boy, but not for Qui Gon, not for someone who is actively acquiescing with the will of the Force. As Don Juan had said,
the Spirit reveals itself to everyone with the same intensity and consistency, but only sorcerers, and Naguals in particular, are attuned to such revelations.
There is always hope, my friend, though it often comes in forms not looked for. The key is knowing how to see it and seizing that opportunity.
Sorcerers, and specifically the Naguals, therefore had to be actively and permanently on the lookout for manifestations of the Spirit.
The Force is unusually strong with him. That much is clear. Who was his father?
There was no father. I carried him, I gave birth, I raised him. I can't explain what happened.
And Qui-Gon caught all the hints that the Force was clearly sending him. Force is everywhere as an abstract element that is unseen and never outlined for the audience by the director, yet it is there. The path that Qui-Gon takes inevitably leads him to Anakin. Few examples are Jar Jar being saved by Qui-Gon, a ship being damaged and needing repairs, which leads them to Tatooine, where they had to walk in that particular shop. Then Jar Jar had to get into trouble so Anakin could step in, which finally leads to a sandstorm that forces them to stay together. It may seem that a bunch of things happened randomly, and Qui-Gon found Anakin that way. But in reality, the reason why Qui-Gon found Anakin is because he was an excellent warrior. Every step of the way, he made decisions trusting the Force and being in the present moment. He never planned ahead, never worried what would happen in the far future. And every small or big decision he made, he always trusted his instincts in the given moment. That, and only that, is what led him to find Anakin. So why is Force not in balance? Or what does that even mean? I have summarized a commonality between different spiritual, religious, and mythological sources, and put together an explanation for the concept of the Force in balance and how it works. Let's start first with Buddhism and its teachings about karma. The word karma is a Sanskrit term that means action or doing. Everything that a human being does accumulates karma. In our past lives, we've done numerous deeds, both good and bad. Good deeds create positive karma, and bad ones create negative karma. Positive karma will lead to good fortune and a blessed life. Negative karma will lead to misfortune and suffering. Karma means that we reap what we sow, but it's often difficult for us to understand how this plays out because different karma ripens at different times. When we create karma, we store a karmic seed in our consciousness. This seed can come to fruition in our present life, our next life, or in another future life. For example, around us we may notice people who do bad things but still enjoy good fortune. It seems like they don't experience retribution for the bad things they've done. However, Their good fortune actually comes from the positive karma they've created in past lives. It's not that their bad deeds don't create negative karma. Rather, the negative karma they've created in this life has yet to ripen and come to effect. For example, what happens to the Jedi Order cannot be attributed as a coincidence or bad luck or simply to the genius of Darth Sidious. This fate was a long time coming. The Jedi Order as a collective group have accumulated positive karma in the past, which resulted in what we see in the prequels. Their life is good, they have everything they need. But they have been doing something wrong for a very long time, since the negative karma Jedi accumulated was so enormous that it was ready to explode during the revenge of the Sith. Let's pinpoint what exactly they did wrong and why the punishment was so hard, which cannot be only explained through karma, even though it plays a major part in it. In The Hero of the Thousand Faces, author Joseph Campbell discusses in depth myths, legends, religious and spiritual beliefs commonly known around the world. He outlines what they all have in common. I want to focus on two important aspects. First, one is what he calls the call to adventure. The first stage of the mythological journey, called to adventure, signifies that destiny has summoned the hero and transferred his spiritual center of gravity from within the pale of his society to a zone unknown. The call to adventure is an event that forces a hero of the story to act, to move, to leave his house, to begin his adventure. The journey the hero will take will eventually be of benefit to him, to his character, to his soul. He may suffer greatly in the process, but in the end, it is always in his own interest to partake in adventure and not to decline it. And that's the second part of it, which Joseph Campbell calls refusal of the call. It is when a hero refuses an offer and never starts his adventure. And whenever the hero does that, he essentially wrongs himself in the long run. He does a disservice to his soul. The myths and folktales of the whole world make clear that the refusal is essentially a refusal to give up what one takes to be one's own interest.
You must learn the ways of the Force if you're to come with me to Alderaan.
Alderaan? I'm not going to Alderaan. I've got to get home. It's late. I'm in port as it is.
I need your help, Luke. She needs your help. I'm getting too old for this sort of thing.
I can't get involved. I've got work to do. It's not that I like the Empire. I hate it, but there's nothing I can do about it right now.
Often in actual life, and not infrequently in the myths and popular tales, we encounter the dual case of the call unanswered. For it is always possible to turn the ear to other interests. Refusal of the summons converts the adventure into its negative. Flowering world becomes a wasteland of dry stones, and life feels meaningless. It's important to realize that even after Luke lost Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen, he could have stayed at the farm, making an argument that their relatives worked so long and so hard to build and maintain its farm. It would be disrespectful to abandon it. This or any other reason, it doesn't matter. The point is, Luke had a choice to make, and he decided to go with Ben.
I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father.
He answered a call to adventure. If Luke refused the call and never went with Ben, all those things that he was supposed to do would never come to fruition. He would never destroy the Death Star, become a Jedi, face his father and the Emperor. Luke had a destiny just like everyone else. Everyone comes with a purpose in life, with a certain talent or two, and the mission to achieve, a path one needs to walk, a destiny to fulfill. This is prominent in a lot of different spiritual teachings, not to mention countless myths and legends.
You know, if you go with your heart and do what you think is right, generally it'll take you in the right place because, as I say, then you'll be doing things that you love. And even if you're doing something that is, you know, you decide to be a gardener, and that's really what you want to do, and that's what gives you pleasure, then be a gardener. Even though your father and your friends may say, why aren't you a lawyer? Because you can be a lawyer. You got accepted to law school. Why you want to be a gardener? Say, well, I like this. You'll find that you'll be much happier because, money can't buy you happiness. And that's been proven a million times. It can buy you pleasure. But it's not going to ever buy you happiness. And over time, you can't make enough money to buy you pleasure anymore because you need so much to keep you going. So it's better to get in there with joy because it doesn't cost you anything.
Before you embark on any path, ask the question, does this path have a heart? If the answer is no, you will know it. And then you must choose another path. The trouble is nobody asks the question. And when a man finally realizes that he has taken a path without a heart, the path is ready to kill him. At that point, very few men can stop to deliberate and leave the path. A path without a heart is never enjoyable. You have to work hard even to take it. On the other hand, a path with heart is easy. It does not make you work at liking it. What is important to grasp here is that when a person doesn't do what he or she was meant to do in life, that also accumulates a negative karma. This is commonly misunderstood. People think it is only doing bad things will bring negative karma, and doing good things will bring positive, which is true, but there is more to it. Not doing what you were born to do also accumulates a negative karma. So, if Luke never went to fight the Empire, imagine how much suffering would have happened in the galaxy. How many planets would the Death Star destroy? An immense negative karma would take its toll on Luke and his soul. Keep in mind this aspect of refusing the call, because in a way it is similar to what is taught in Castaneda's books. As previously mentioned, the spirit is the abstract force that is always present. It sends its omens, signs, messages, but it is commonly ignored by people. As Don Juan explained, the spirit reveals itself to everyone, but only sorcerers are adapted to notice it, and we already discussed how. As a result, an average man does not participate in what spirit has to offer. An average man doesn't look or even believe in sorcery, magic, shamanism, however you want to call it. He does not travel to different worlds beyond his physical body, learns ancient secrets, and becomes a warrior to achieve total freedom. Instead, an average man is only interested and engulfed in the world of objects, as Don Juan puts it. Mundane routines and rules established by the society, never seeking what is beyond. So when omens and signs from the spirit are ignored, people miss opportunities that are essentially meant to help them one way or the other, setting them on a journey that would eventually lead them to become a better person. Constantly rejecting these signs and messages from the spirit is in a way very much like refusing a call in myths and legends, which Joseph Campbell often spoke about. This, in turn, leads to accumulating a negative karma when a person is not doing what they are meant to do. He wrongs not only himself, but also people around him. So when force is not in balance, it means negative karma outweighs the positive in a galaxy as a whole. Either because people do evil deeds more than good, or people are not doing what they are meant to with their lives. Usually both of these at the same time. And when force starts to seek balance, it means that people will reap what they sow. There is no way of escaping it, even for the Jedi Order. So what did the Jedi do to deserve such fate? They didn't seem to be bad guys in the movies. They didn't kill innocent people or burn villages. They helped people and served the Republic. Sure, you get a few bad apples here and there, but that shouldn't mean that the entire order has to be eradicated. And yet, that's just what happens. The important part we need to understand is what the Jedi Order meant to accomplish as a collective group. What was their role as Force sensitives, and were they doing what they were destined to? Qui Gon, as a director's commentary, was created to be a perfect example of a true Jedi Knight. Through his service to the Force, he achieves immortality. This is the most important element when we discuss spirituality. Maintaining awareness after death is shown as a next step in evolution of the Force-sensitive being. As Obi-Wan puts it before disappearing in front of Vader,
If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
Jedi were meant to achieve this in large numbers. It should have been a standard procedure. Just like a Padawan eventually becomes a knight, after that, the next rank should be maintaining awareness after death. Call it whatever you want. Rank of a Force ghost, if you will. It is clear that this is the next step in evolution for Force sensitives. Just as, in many spiritual teachings, including Castaneda's, this is the next step in the spiritual journey of the soul. Taoists believed in the universe. For them, the triumph of the soul was not to disappear like a raindrop into the ocean of nirvana, but to achieve personal immortality. However, tragically, no one was able to maintain awareness after death, except Qui Gon. Jedi were meant to adhere to the will of the Force, because Force sensitives were the only ones that truly could. Through discipline, intense training, quiet mind, and serving the will of the Force, Jedi were meant to achieve what Qui Gon did, but in large numbers. Through that, they were meant to inspire and lead people by example, to be a spiritual center for the entire galaxy. Instead, Jedi stopped seeking and exploring the Force altogether. Force, as ever mysterious, stopped being so mysterious to them. They wrote down rules, codes, and started to follow them instead of the Force. They've become mundane, uninterested in seeking and exploring the mysteries of the Force, becoming arrogant, self-righteous, and self-assured in their limited knowledge.
What Yoda claims is not possible.
As far as we know.
The dead are part of the cosmic force and lose their individuality. I fear Yoda is under attack by the Sith.
The Jedi Order slowly became stagnant. It transformed from a place where people used to serve the Force into a place where rules and titles started to mean more. It wasn't a single evil act that Jedi did, and in return paid a heavy price. No, it was a slow decay, a decay that lasted many centuries. It was all of those calls for adventures refused, all the signs of the spirit ignored, all the omens and messages disregarded.
He is the chosen one. You must see it.
No, he will not be trained.
These in turn slowly accumulated as a negative karma, bit by bit, to a point where Force had to strike back to balance itself. As the Buddha said, do not overlook tiny good actions, thinking they are of no benefit. Even tiny drops of water in the end will fill a huge vessel. Do not overlook negative actions merely because they are small. However small a spark may be, it can burn down a haystack as big as a mountain. Jedi never meant to build a fancy temple in the capital of the Republic and meddle in politics and dramas of many cultures across the galaxy. They were meant to live in a solitary life, in nature, just like the way Yoda is on Dagobah, or sometimes be on the move like Qui Gon, serving the will of the Force. Jedi were meant to work on themselves as warriors in Castaneda's books do, to become free of thoughts and ego, and eventually achieve immortality, to lead by an example and inspire others through their spiritual accomplishments, because they were the only ones that could. This was their responsibility. They, as Force sensitives, were the only ones that could achieve a state of maintaining awareness after death. Instead, they stopped evolving spiritually and decided to play gods among humans. And since this was not the path they were meant to take, they have accumulated an immense negative karma. They held more responsibility than anyone else. Hence the reason for such devastating fate in Revenge of the Sith. Instead of adhering to the will of the Force, Jedi took orders from politicians, other Jedi masters, and served ideals far beyond what they were meant to serve.
Anakin, my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy!
And we all know where that got them. There are some parallels that can be made between the Jedi Order and the ancient Seers, in a sense that both have become too self-important, arrogant, and accumulated power which they never wanted to lose.
All who gain power are afraid to lose it.
The last remnants of the ancient Seers were killed by the Spaniards, just like the Jedi during Order 66. Only a few survived, like Yoda and Obi-Wan, changing their names and acting like they are someone else entirely, just like those few stalker sorcerers that survived the Spaniards and hid across the continent. Ancient Seers were building temples and meddling in people's affairs. So did the Jedi. The fate they shared was very similar as well.
They thought that they were untouchable. That is, until the invaders smashed them and put most of them to horrendous deaths. The ancient Seers had no protection whatsoever, despite their total certainty that they were invulnerable.
If we look at Darth Sidious through spiritual lenses, he comes to existence because forces of light have diverged from their original true path. The Jedi Order stopped serving and adhering to the will of the Force. Their negative karma grew to a point that Force had to create Sidious as a punishment for their sins. Though, it is important to mention that civilization itself has departed from its path, and not just the Jedi Order. The galaxy was full of conflicts, crimes were a regular thing, and the Republic was corrupt as never before. Darth Sidious symbolizes all the sins of the Jedi accumulated into one person, all the negative karma fused into one being. He is the tool of the Force, created to balance itself. And because of that, he's invincible. No matter who he battles or how dire the situation is, he will survive. That is, until the Force no longer needs him. The prophesized one will keep in check the Punisher. The resemblance to the Antichrist from Christian tradition is strongly present here. At first, it is said that the Antichrist will be very popular in the public eye. He will be admired, even loved by many. Then, slowly, he will drag the world into wars. And these wars, in truth, will be against the Christians, and not what it may look like on the surface. Just as Clone Wars were puppeteered by Palpatine to slowly destroy the Jedi, turning the Senate and the Republic against the Order, while on the surface it looked like a conflict between the Republic and the Trade Federation. When it is too late, the Antichrist will reveal his true nature, his true face. The revelation to John refers to this figure as the man of sin. So, the question may arise that, if Qui Gon was so perfectly acquiescing with the will of the Force, how come he died? Why didn't the Force protect him? This is where we need to understand that those who adhere to the will of the Force always get what is best for them. From the perspective of our ego, death seems like the worst thing that has happened to Qui Gon. But was it though? He has found the path to immortality.
An old friend has learned the path to immortality. One who has returned from the netherworld of the Force, your old master.
Qui-Gon is like Don Juan Matus, master stalker, a perfect warrior, who's only acting for the will of the Force. His last moments were like the last test that he needed to pass. During the battle with Maul, he shows how perfect of a warrior he is, refusing to be entangled in the emotions and the madness of what's happening around him. So he stays empty. He meditates during the battle. Inner silence brings the ability to be present in the moment. In the present moment, he trusts his feelings, knows the will of the Force, and keeps fighting Maul. Instead of thinking and planning what to do, to wait for Obi-Wan to catch up, for example, so two of them can fight Maul together. No, he does what he feels he should. Even after a fatal blow, he doesn't think about himself. Last moments are not about himself, or what he wants or wishes, but rather what needs to be done, what must be done, what the Force calls for. He still does the will of the Force, even seconds before dying.
Promise. Promise me you will train the boy.
Yes, Master.
He is the chosen one. He will bring balance. Train him.
This unbending devotion towards the living Force, this complete trust in it, results in something that has never happened before. He finds a path to immortality. He was chosen, as he later says himself.
You have been chosen, as I was before you.
For what chosen am I?
You will learn to preserve your life force, and so manifest a consciousness which will allow you to commune with the living after death.
He was chosen because he passed the hardest trial there was, to be so utterly in service of the Force that even when dying, still serving its will. Not to mention his years of devotion before that. This achievement is of the utmost importance and should never be underestimated. In fact, if you think about it, the foundation is laid down right there in the beginning of the saga. The first important dialogue we ever hear, not counting the dialogue on the ship, is what Qui Gon tells Obi-Wan about the living Force. And one of the very last shots in the saga is directly the result of that teaching. This is the quote at the start of an episode in Clone Wars, Season 6, Episode 12. 3 episodes that depict how Yoda undergoes teachings and trials. He, as Qui-Gon tells him, has been chosen to be one of the few Jedi who would keep their awareness after death. So the quote, "Death is just the beginning," only applies to those beings who manage to maintain their awareness after death, and not for everyone else who dies a normal death. This is also Castaneda 101. This act of disappearing forever, completely taking your physical body with you and maintaining awareness while doing it. This is the ultimate goal of the new Seers, the goal to freedom. They call it transitioning from organic being into inorganic. In Star Wars terms, basically a Force ghost. Sorcerers in Castaneda's books do it when the time is right, when they finish their tasks in this world, when they did all that the Spirit wanted them to do, when they taught several apprentices who would continue the legacy. Then, and only then, they would leave. Very similar to what Obi-Wan does in A New Hope, and Yoda in Return of the Jedi. When Yoda taught everything that needed to be taught to Luke, he vanished. He knew it was his time.
No more training do you require. Already know you that which you need.
Obi-Wan, for example, could have left any time during the 20 years on Tatooine, but he had to set Luke on the right path first. This was the will of the Force. It had to be done. And just when the moment was right, when all the pieces were set, he left. He knew that his part in this was finished, and he knew that Luke would be fine. The Force would guide him.
The Force will be with you, always.
Obi-Wan didn't worry about what would happen to Luke. He was simply acquiescing with the will of the Force. And by doing so, there can't be any worries. It always leads to what is best for you. Even if you have a tough period for some time, it is eventually happening for your own good. You will emerge a far better person from it than you were before. All you have to do is simply acquiesce with the will of the Force. Or in other terms, accept the call to adventure and not run away from it, not ignore the signs and omens, because running away will make things way worse. Either way, things that you are running away from will come back to haunt you and challenge you again in a much stronger form.
Know your true self. Face me now, or I will devour you.
You can call this phenomena as the sin which was not atoned for, the result of accumulated negative karma, intent of the spirit disregarded, or a call to adventures refused. The Force in Star Wars encapsulates all of these elements together. A mix of teachings from different spiritual, religious, and mythological sources, with the same message at their core. Become free by facing your fears, facing your demons willingly, just as Yoda did. Joseph Campbell writes, "The hero of yesterday becomes the tyrant of tomorrow, unless he crucifies himself today." Let's examine key moments in Yoda's trials from Clone Wars. It all starts with Yoda meditating. And I've already discussed how important it is for warriors to quiet their mind.
The crux of sorcery is the internal dialogue. That is the key to everything. When a warrior learns to stop it, everything becomes possible. The most far-fetched schemes become attainable. The passageway to all the weird and eerie experiences that you have had recently was the fact that you could stop talking to yourself.
Among other things, it makes being in the present moment effortless, which in turn leads to hearing, seeing, or feeling the spirit. In this case, Yoda hears Qui Gon.
It is I, Qui Gon Jinn.
That cannot be. Dead you are.
No. I am part of the living force, Yoda.
Also, what happens to Yoda during the meditation is also Joseph Campbell's call to adventure. Will Yoda answer or refuse? Will he listen to his mind, which tells him that it's impossible to hear from the dead, that this must be the Sith's doing, a sort of trap, a deception? Or will he trust his feelings, his instincts, and follow this voice, seek and explore like every Jedi should?
Everything that we know about the Force tells us that an individual retaining their identity after death is impossible.
Everything that we know, yes. But what about what we know not?
Yoda, being our hero, obviously answers the call and tries to hear Qui-Gon's voice again. At first, he tries a group meditation, but no one hears anything. This is because other Jedi were never meant to hear any of it. They were not ready for it. Far from it. After that, Yoda tries to meditate, but with the use of technology, which is shown as the wrong path. Along with many themes that Star Wars has, one of them is technology versus the Force. In A New Hope, this theme is more relevant.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
Don't be too proud of this technological terror you've constructed. The ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force.
Not always, but most of the time. Technology represents all the material, physical, soullessness. And the Force, the opposite, the ethereal, spiritual, and all the abstract forces that surround us. So, for example, at the very end, when Luke has to choose between using technology or the Force, he chooses to trust his feelings. He turns off the targeting computer.
Use the Force, Luke. Let go, Luke.
He doesn't rely on the computer to do the job, but rather he trusts the Force, trusts his instincts, and that leads to victory. When Yoda uses the technology to induce himself into a deep, meditational state, Qui Gon warns him.
Yoda, no. This is not the way. Come to Dagobah. The answers you seek are here.
After he visits Dagobah and contacts Qui Gon, the journey begins. I don't plan to review each episode, scene by scene, because that would take unnecessarily too long. Instead, I just want to lay out the key aspects about Yoda's trials. It's centered around Yoda's overcoming his own personal fear. Fear of losing the members of the Order and failing them as Grand Master, which are like a family to him. In order to overcome this fear, he had to face it. And when he did, the harsh truth was revealed to him that they, the Jedi Order, have already lost the war. And I don't mean the Republic losing the war against the Trade Federation. I mean in terms of spirituality. If followers of light fight wars and kill beings across the galaxy, they are no longer followers of light. It is clear that the Jedi never meant to do any of this.
No longer certain that one ever does win a war. I am. For in fighting the battles, the bloodshed, already lost we have.
To say it's okay to believe whatever you believe, organized religions have a place, but in the end, when they start saying things that are not positive and are not compassionate or not caring, the Inquisitions and all, killing people in the name of God is wrong. There's just no question about it, because that's absolutely opposite of what all gods, shaman, everybody have taught us, which is God is love, not God is hate.
Additionally, what Yoda had to realize is that whatever happens will happen as the Force wills it. So to worry and cling to the future that he personally desires, it's not the answer. Obviously, it's tremendously hard to even dwell on the idea that the entire Order might perish. Yet he needs to learn to let go, to be ready for whatever fate the Force would bring, and acquiesce with the will of the Force no matter what. This is what Qui Gon was doing all the time, always in service of the Force.
I shall do what I must, Obi-Wan.
Remember how ancient Seers would make deals with alien beings in dreaming so that they can prolong their lives? Well, this is the type of illusionary world aliens would offer. In exchange, Seers could never leave such a place willingly. The sequence where Yoda is offered an illusionary peaceful world to be in is a deception. It is quite similar to the traps that ancient Seers fell for.
Yes, so peaceful as it was before the war.
War? Oh, there is no war here, Master. Only peace and tranquility.
No war?
But even when offered a blissful place where Yoda could stay, our hero says no. He sees through lies and deception. Though it is hard for our hero, since this is basically the manifestation of his dreams. All Padawans are safe and alive. No one turned to the dark side. No war, no conflict. And yet, Yoda lets it go. And this lesson of letting go, that Yoda struggled to learn, is the exact lesson he teaches Anakin later on, in Revenge of the Sith.
Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose.
At the very end of his trials, Yoda is forced to make a decision. To sacrifice Anakin, but kill Sidious. Or save Anakin, but let Sidious go. And here is where the hero is tested the most. It comes down to a single moment where the hero is forced to choose. Either listen to one's instincts, one's feelings, one's heart, or listen to the mind. Heart being the right path, mind is always represented as the wrong one. This is quite common in Star Wars, choosing between the heart and the mind. It's what makes a hero or breaks him. Let's examine this with 2 examples before we continue with Yoda. Anakin when deciding whether to kill Count Dooku or not, and Ahsoka choosing to stay or leave the Order. Anakin is torn apart between the heart and the mind. His feelings tell him that it is not right to kill an unarmed prisoner.
I shouldn't.
But his mind says otherwise. In many different spiritual teachings, through different terminology, it is said that your true self, your soul, your higher self, speaks through the heart, through your instincts, while the ego that a person accumulates during their lifetime speaks through the mind. So the right path is always to be in the present moment, because being in the present moment makes it effortless to listen to your heart, to trust your instincts, and not the mind. Because the mind is never in the present moment, it always takes you either into the future or into the past. The barrage of thoughts that never lets you be at peace, which always makes you worry about what might be in the future or what already happened long ago. This is the essential conflict in all of us. We either listen to our heart or our mind.
I believe you will bring balance to the Force, that you will face your demons and save the universe.
And this creature of the dark side, do I leave or do I stay and kill him?
Neither. Look deeper. You will find another way.
I don't understand.
Not far from here, there is a place which is strong in the dark side of the Force. You must go there.
And destroy the sun.
Remember your training, Anakin. Trust your instincts.
Master! Master!
Remember, concentrate on the moment. Feel, don't think. Use your instincts.
I will.
They continually speak to us, telling us the will of the Force. When you learn to quiet your mind, you'll hear them speaking to you.
Among many things, Palpatine represents that aspect of the dark side as well. He always forces Anakin to worry and think about the future or the past.
The Jedi Council want control of the Republic. They're planning to betray me.
Learn to know the dark side of the Force, and you will be able to save your wife from certain death.
When Anakin is deciding what to do with Count Dooku, he's torn apart between the mind and the heart. He feels that it's wrong to kill. Yet his mind reminds him of all that happened and can happen if Dooku lives. And Palpatine brings up those arguments moments later.
He was too dangerous to be kept alive.
Yes, but he was an unarmed prisoner. I shouldn't have done that. It's not the Jedi way.
It is only natural. He cut off your arm, and you wanted revenge. It wasn't the first time, Anakin. Remember what you told me about your mother and the Sand People?
This aspect is best presented in this beautiful scene, where we hear Palpatine's words as a haunting voice inside Anakin's head, like thoughts that tore Anakin apart.
You do know, don't you? If the Jedi destroy me, any chance of saving her will be lost.
All of my movies are about one thing, which is the fact that the only prison you're in is the prison of your mind. And if you decide to open the door and get out, you can.
Thank you.
The chains are the easy part. It's what goes on in here that's hard.
On a side note, if you're interested in Castaneda's full explanation about the mind and why it is such a huge problem for human beings, I advise you to read his book called The Active Side of Infinity. Specifically, there's one chapter called Mud Shadows. After reading it, you may understand why George would call mind a prison. Now back to where we were. It all comes down to what Qui Gon taught Anakin: to feel and not to think, to trust his instincts, his feelings, to quiet his mind and hear the will of the Force. While Palpatine always tried to force Anakin to do the exact opposite. Ahsoka is in a similar situation. She either has to trust her feelings or listen to the mind. The mind is logical. It worries about tomorrow. It wants comfort, certainty, and safety. No risks, no adventures, and so on. A heart connects you to the Force, to what you really want, what you love. It takes you on the right path, even if through the mind's view it seems dangerous and illogical.
The Jedi Order is your life. You can't just throw it away like this. Ahsoka, you are making a mistake.
Maybe. But I have to sort this out on my own. Without the Council. And without you.
I understand. More than you realize, I understand wanting to walk away from the Order.
I know.
Ahsoka makes the hardest decision to leave the Order. Because she trusts her instincts, and this is what the heart is saying.
I'm sorry, Master. But I'm not coming back.
From the mind's perspective, it seems insane to leave the Order. To venture out there with no roof on your head, no money, no friends, no family. And yet, this is the right path for her. She passed the test. Now let's get back to Yoda. He, like Ahsoka, listens to his heart and not the mind. And here again, Palpatine represents the mind. He tries to force our hero to think, to worry about the future, to look at the bigger picture, to stop Yoda from concentrating on the moment.
Why not let him go? Let him die, and you can stop all that I will do.
The future is not yours yet. Tempted I will not be. Sacrifice all I am ready to do.
But Yoda trusts his feelings and saves Anakin, which makes him complete the trial successfully.
We have failed to break Master Yoda.
The Wills needed to know, what would Yoda do in the most dire situation? Would he succumb to his biggest fear of risking to lose the Jedi Order, therefore sacrificing Anakin and try to kill Sidious? Or would he listen to his heart and save Anakin no matter what? Only after that, they allow him to be trained by Qui Gon to maintain awareness after death.
The one you know as Qui-Gon Jinn will commune with you and guide your training. Like us, you shall learn to maintain your consciousness after death. Enlightenment. Spirit. Balance.
When Yoda faced his fears and emerged victorious, parts of his old identity died along the way. Parts that clinged and feared. The aspect that I've discussed earlier, when warriors strive to lose their ego, in Star Wars is portrayed through the concept of facing fears, just like Yoda did in his trials. Fears are the product of an ego, and if a person faces them, those parts of him die along with those fears.
Come back to us, Yoda.
Died, have I?
In a way.
But what would be the criteria to know that I'm dead? Unless you want me to actually die physically. No, he said. I don't want your body to die physically. I want your person to die. The two are very different affairs. In essence, your person has very little to do with your body. Your person is your mind, and believe you me, your mind is not yours.
Now that you've been watching this long, this sentence should make more sense to you. Freeing from themselves is what warriors do, becoming empty, demolishing the ego. Yoda in the prequel trilogy worries a lot, has fears of losing the members of the Order and failing them as a Grand Master. He doesn't trust the Force completely. While Yoda in the original trilogy is free from all of it, and he completely trusts the Force. Only after 20 years under the guidance of Qui Gon on Dagobah, Yoda is finally free from himself. And this, as mentioned earlier, is possible through facing all that you fear. One of the very last things Don Juan told Castaneda seconds before disappearing from this world was this:
Forget the self, and you will fear nothing in whatever level of awareness you find yourself to be.
Now that we have discussed how a trial can be successfully completed, let's look at how it can fail. It all starts with Anakin having a nightmare. He's forced to face his fears. The trial is beginning. The call to adventure. Of course, the mind says that he should obey the order and stay hidden to protect Padme. But he makes the correct choice. He meditates, acquires inner silence, becomes mindful of the living force. Through that, he trusts his instincts, his heart, and decides to go to Tatooine instead.
I know I'm disobeying my mandate to protect you, Senator. But I have to go. I have to help her.
There, eventually he is forced to face his greatest fear, his mother's death. Just as Yoda had to face his biggest fears during his trials. But Anakin, unlike Yoda, fails. The mind, the ego, the attachments, the anger, rage, and emotions win over him, and he does something that his mother would have never approved of. Something terrible. Then it cuts to Yoda meditating. Through meditation, he is mindful of the living force, and he hears through the force what is of utmost importance: the pain that Anakin is going through. This is really important because of all the things that are happening in the galaxy. This is what Yoda hears and feels through the Force. This is essentially the will of the Force. Yoda hears what the Force wants him to hear. Basically, the Force is telling Yoda, pay attention to this. Yoda even shares this with Mace Windu, but we never see anything to be done about it. No one went to Anakin to talk or to give friendly advice, to discuss what happened, to offer help and guide him. Another will of the Force ignored by the high-ranking members of the Order. They have been ignoring the will of the Force long before and after Anakin showed up at their doorstep. This scene in Attack of the Clones is very similar to the Clone Wars scene, where Yoda hears Qui Gon. Both are calls to adventure. Both begin by acquiring inner silence, hearing and feeling the will of the Force. But in the movie, Yoda fails to investigate this call to adventure. This sign from the Force he ignores. Maybe because the war started and he never had time for it. Whatever the reason, he failed to answer the call. He refused. However, in Clone Wars, he did the opposite. He kept insisting and investigating. He trusted his instincts and answered the call. And that led him to evolve spiritually. He passed the trials and faced his fears, suffered greatly in the process, but in the end, it was all worth it. And at long last, we can now talk about Anakin.
How can you eat that?
But Master, you're the one who always taught me to feed off the living force.
That's not what I...
There's just so much about Anakin that I'd like to start from the very beginning. First of all, Anakin's unusual inception and birth obviously is a metaphor for Jesus Christ, who had no earthly father, but rather was a son of God, while Anakin mysteriously was conceived by the Force.
There was no father.
Both have been prophesized, and their roles are similar in the sense that both have been sent to this world to make the will of the Force, or a will of God, to come true. After that, we have the whole story of how we meet Anakin when he's little.
Finding him was the will of the Force. I have no doubt of that.
When Qui Gon found Anakin by being an impeccable warrior, he gave the Jedi Order a sort of chance to be saved. A wake-up call, if you will. However, the Order was utterly detached from the will of the Force. When the Force users were presented with such a tremendous discovery, such as Anakin, their reaction is dull. A sort of mild inconvenience to them. A subject that can be later discussed, if ever.
Finding him was the will of the Force. I have no doubt of that.
Bring him before us, then.
Instead of being ecstatic, curious to no end, thanking the Force with such an extraordinary gift, being completely engaged in uncovering the mystery of how Anakin came to be, debating about the prophecy, they do the very least of it. In fact, they don't even allow him to be trained.
He is to be trained, then?
No. He will not be trained.
No.
He is too old.
He is the chosen one. You must see it.
How insane is it that some man-made rule about the age requirement is more important than the actual will of the Force? This is a clear indication that Jedi have completely lost their way. They reject the prophesized one. The parallel can be drawn again between Anakin and Jesus, in a sense that both have been long prophesized and long awaited. However, once they actually came, they have been rejected by their own people. Also, I want to briefly mention the unusual amount of midichlorians that Anakin had. In books of Carlos Castaneda, it is often mentioned that Seers who see through human beings see their energy bodies, their energetic configurations. They can tell, for example, who is a born leader and who is not just by looking at them. Who has more energy and who doesn't. This whole concept of energetic configurations is translated into Star Wars as midichlorians, since the concept of seeing has been removed from Star Wars in early drafts. So, to understand one's capability in the Force, it's not measured by seeing someone's energy body, but by examining how much midichlorian count one has in blood. The subject of the energetic configurations is the same, but the approach is different. Also, Anakin undergoes training as a Jedi for 13 years, which happens to be exactly the same amount of years Castaneda was under the apprenticeship of Don Juan Matus.
During the 13 years of my association with him, Don Juan taught me the basic steps toward accomplishing this feat of seeing. I have discussed those steps in all of my previous writings.
The lessons that Qui Gon taught Anakin resonated with him in a more impactful way than the teachings from Obi-Wan or other Jedi Masters.
Remember, concentrate on the moment. Feel, don't think. Use your instincts.
Patience. Use the Force. Think.
Sorry, Master.
He went in there to hide, not to run.
Yes, Master.
Next time, try not to lose it.
Yes, Master.
This weapon is your life.
I try, Master.
It seemed natural to him, the teachings of the living Force, to act here and now, to feel and not think, to trust his instincts.
That was some shortcut, Anakin. He went completely the other way. Once again, you've proved...
If you'll excuse me...
I hate it when he does that.
Anakin, when focused and concentrated on the moment, is the unstoppable force, when he is empty of thoughts and emotions. However, whenever his ego, his emotions, and attachments get in the way, he always seems to make the same mistake. Most of the time, Anakin is mindful of the living Force, which helps him to succeed even in the most dangerous of situations. He comes up with the most uncommon strategies in the moment, and, to everyone's surprise, they often work.
There must be a wire we should cut, or something to stop the countdown.
Stand back.
Wow, how did you know that would work?
I trusted my instincts.
He is accustomed to pull off even the most impossible maneuvers, escape, and succeed in the most bizarre and crazy situations. And again, I want to repeat why it works. Because Anakin trusts his instincts. He's mindful of the living Force. The Force is with him, and he is one with the Force. Hence, why he is so incredible at flying. However, the invincibility and the power that comes from being mindful of the living Force slowly grew in transition into arrogance. The arrogance of assuming that it is he who is so powerful and unbeatable, that is he who accomplishes these impossible tasks, and not because he is mindful of the living Force.
I am more powerful than the Chancellor. I can overthrow him. And together, you and I can rule the galaxy. Make things the way we want them to be.
The moment it becomes about ego, about me, myself, and I, the connection to the living Force is lost. Anakin is on his own. No longer protected by the Force, no longer on the right path. He is no longer with the Force, one with it, but rather, in a way, against it. When he was a Padawan, usually he made a mistake of failing to acknowledge whenever he lost the focus of the moment, when he stopped trusting his instincts and instead listened to his mind. For example, rushing towards Count Dooku.
We'll take him together. You going slowly on the left.
Taking him now! No, Anakin, no! No!
A warrior can't concentrate on the present moment if he worries about the future or clings to the past. So whenever Padme, Shmi, Obi-Wan, or anyone else Anakin cares about is in danger, he tends to more often than not lose focus, no longer being mindful of the living Force. When that happens, he no longer listens to his heart. Instead, the mind takes over, and in the heat of the moment, it's very hard to differentiate which part inside of him is talking. It's easy to confuse the two. And when Anakin sees Count Dooku, he feels like he should rush at him right away, as the living Force teaches. However, as we already talked about, you can only adhere to the living Force if your mind is clear, your ego and emotions kept in check. Otherwise, it's the prison of your mind. When you are one with the Force, you will always win, even in the situations that seem impossible. And when you are acting against the will of the Force, you will suffer tremendously. We can look at prequel movies like an example of you reap what you sow. Karma doing its thing. Positive brings good fortune, negative brings suffering. Force balancing itself on a smaller scale on a single individual. In Episode 1, Anakin helps complete strangers while endangering his own life, and as a reward, he is freed from slavery. In Episode 2, he slaughters Sand People, and as a punishment, gets his hand cut off. In Episode 3, he betrays the Jedi Order and kills younglings. For that, he suffered tremendously. Metaphorically, you could say he burns in hell for his sins. The planet Mustafar obviously being a metaphor for the Christian hell. And he spends the next 20 years in pain, both mentally and physically, suffering for his sins. Now that we have discussed many aspects of the Castaneda's teachings, and Force in general, I want to sum it all up before we proceed with the last chapter. So, what is the light side? What makes one a true Jedi like Qui Gon Jinn? And let's discuss a bit the opposite, the dark side as well. First, a true Jedi seeks to become empty, free from ego. One cannot serve the Force to its fullest if one is serving himself. This aspect in Star Wars is portrayed through characters facing their fears. When they successfully do so, they lose part of their old identity and become more free, more light. While the opposite of this, the Sith, the dark side if you will, is being self-centered, selfish, egotistic. Having a strong ego, clinging to your name, your title, your powers. Dark side is all about me, myself, and I. What I want and how I can get it. Not for the people around me, only for myself. And never in the service of the Force. Never adhering to the will of the Force. After a follower of light manages to at least some degree become empty, it is much easier for him to acquire inner silence. True Jedi seeks to stop the internal dialogue. To have a quiet mind is to hear the will of the Force. While the Sith never bother with inner silence, their mind is occupied with never-ending thoughts. In fact, they use the mind to remember all the painful and horrific things that happened to them, so they can channel the dark side better, to feel hate and anger easier. After becoming empty and acquiring inner silence, the follower of light can now much easier concentrate on the moment, to be here and now, to be mindful of the living Force. And with all of the above accomplished, by losing the ego, acquiring the inner silence, concentrating on the moment, the follower of light can now effortlessly trust his instincts, his feelings, his intuition, his heart, and thus always makes the best decision, the right decisions, which will eventually lead him to spiritual growth, to enlightenment, to transcend this physical existence, or in Star Wars terms, to become a Force ghost, becoming more powerful than a dark side user can ever possibly imagine. All of these can be summed up and simplified as heart versus mind, which is essentially the same as trusting your instincts versus listening to the mind. As mentioned earlier, Qui Gon, as an exemplary Jedi, teaches Anakin to concentrate on the moment, to feel, not to think. While Palpatine always tries to make Anakin think, to fear what might happen to Padme, for example, to worry, to plan ahead, to doubt, and to stress. Anything except concentrating on the moment. This is light versus dark summed up through spiritual lenses. The heart is always in the moment. The mind is not. Whoever you choose to listen to is what makes you on the light side or the dark side.
There's always this good in you at this point. The good part is saying, what am I doing? And the bad part is saying, I'm doing this for Padme, I'm doing this for us, and it'll be better for the universe, it'll be better for everybody. You know, but there's always this little part in you is saying, what am I doing?
The ending of Return of the Jedi is where the influence of Carlos Castaneda's books end. We move spiritually to a completely different level. This is where we come to realize that maintaining awareness after death through a warrior's path is not the only way. There are other ways, at least one more. Because we see Anakin appearing beside Yoda and Obi-Wan after dying. So, how does he accomplish that? The events that transpire in the throne room have definite influences from Christianity. First is when Luke throws away his lightsaber, which has to be one of the most heroic, bravest, and hardest decisions the hero could ever make. Luke would rather die than succumb to the dark side, He would rather die than fight and choose violence. In my opinion, it is the most rebellious act one could ever do. The most Jedi thing that anyone has ever done. This is Return of the Jedi. A true Jedi. A Jedi that doesn't need a weapon, for he trusts the Force with his life. This choosing of heart over mind in the most impossible situation. The ego, the mind, screams of fear, of survival, of self-preservation, of self-defense. To take up the sword and fight the Emperor. But Luke chooses not to. He literally chooses death over violence. There is no secret plan to distract the Emperor, or buy some time for the Rebel Alliance to come in and help, or anything of that sort. It is plain and simple. Luke would rather die than continue fighting, even in the terms of self-defense. The lightsaber is not needed, and perhaps it was never needed for those who truly follow the light side. Luke is ready to die for his father, and Anakin, in return, sacrifices himself for his son. As I discussed earlier, Sidious came to being because of all the negative karma that not only the Jedi Order has accumulated, but also civilization in general. Sidious is the result of all the sins of the world. He is like the Antichrist, also known as the Man of Sin. Anakin, in a symbolic way, carries the sins of the whole world on his shoulders and crucifies himself willingly. He dies to save not only Luke, but everyone. Once again, we have another parallel between Anakin and Jesus. Both the birth and the death are very similar. To sacrifice yourself for someone is one of the purest forms of expressing true love. When Luke tells his father that he is going to save him, he means to save his physical body. However, the response that Anakin gives outlines what's really important.
No, you're coming with me. I'll not leave you here. I've got to save you.
You already have.
Meaning that Luke saved Anakin's soul. He already saved him, saved what really mattered. Because the physical body comes and goes. But the soul lives on. Joseph Campbell writes, "Perhaps some of us have to go through dark and devious ways before we can find the river of peace, or the high road to the soul's destination." Anakin achieves the same state of maintaining awareness after death, just as Obi-Wan and Yoda, though through a different path, through the power of love. A small but important detail that needs to be pointed out is that Anakin appears as his younger self after death, while Kenobi and Yoda look as old as they were before disappearing. In Christian tradition, those who reach heaven are blessed with eternal afterlife and exist in their youngest forms as they once were on Earth. However, looking young after death is common in many religions or spiritual beliefs. But since the ending of Return of the Jedi is so heavily influenced by Christian teachings, I would guess that Anakin looking young was inspired mostly by it as well. The fact that Anakin was not trained for 20 years by Qui Gon to learn how to maintain awareness after death, and yet still succeeded to do so, while also looking young as a Force ghost, sends a strong message. That path of love is more powerful, perhaps something that Jedi lacked for a long time. In fact, the very last words that Don Juan ever told Castaneda before disappearing from this world were these: "I hope you will find love." But the distinction has to be made of what type of love we are talking about when we discuss Anakin's redemption. For example, the love we saw in the prequels by Anakin was of possessiveness, of passion, jealousy, fear, and control. Love is patient, love is kind. Love does not envy, is not boastful, is not arrogant. Love that Luke brings and lights up in his father is pure, selfless, altruistic, compassionate, forgiving, and all-inclusive. Luke not only forgives his father for everything he has done, not only just decides to spare his life, but he is ready to die for him. Mind you, this Darth Vader we are talking about, the absolute monster, one of the most hated and feared individuals in the entire galaxy. Who knows how many people he killed in the last 20 years. He is barely even human at this point. And this is for whom Luke decides to sacrifice himself. For the worst of the worst. This gesture of self-sacrifice, which is the pure expression of true love, is what brings back Anakin Skywalker. This is what redeems Anakin. Love saves even the worst of us, and it is never too late to say no to the mind and choose the path of the heart. The spiritual journeys that our Force-sensitive heroes take eventually all lead them to one thing: freedom. The ultimate freedom.
Yet, open to us, a path remains. That unknown to the Sith is. Through this path, victory we may yet find. Not victory in the Clone Wars, but victory for all time.
To reach the state of enlightenment. To sneak by the eagle. To escape the cycle of reincarnation. To reach heaven.
To seek freedom is the only driving force I know. Freedom to fly off into that infinity out there. Freedom to dissolve, to lift off. Be like the flame of a candle, which, in spite of being up against the light of 1 billion stars, remains intact, because it never pretended to be more than what it is: a mere candle. I am already given to the power that rules my fate, and I cling to nothing, so I will have nothing to defend. I have no thoughts, so I will see. I fear nothing, so I will remember myself. Detached and at ease, I will dart past the eagle to be free.